the most interesting thing about that whole episode is that all of the drones that entered Poland were unarmed, which to me is an indicator that it was intentional. Because if they were aiming at Ukraine, they would have been armed because they attack Ukraine. What they were doing here with unarmed drones was just testing to see what NATO and Poland would do.
So let's, from your personal perspective, I know you were in Ukraine recently and you were in Odessa when Russia launched that largest ever overnight attack with more than 800 missiles and drones. You'll be very familiar with the conditions in the Ukraine war, but what was that night like for you?
It was loud. I've been to Odessa and Kyiv and other places several times over the past few years. And so the nightly air raids are not something unusual. What was unusual that night was the number of attacks, the number of projectiles that were sent. It was a very large number. And you heard the air defenses, and you learned to differentiate the sounds between the incoming drone, kind of a low motor, the air defense systems of different types that go after them, and then the very loud explosions, which is when something hits the ground. And so we heard all of that a couple times throughout the night. Having lived through this several times, and the Ukrainians, of course, live through it every night, you know that the risks are pretty small, in the law of large numbers. It may hit somewhere, someone may get killed, and in that case they did that night in Odessa. But the chances of it affecting you are very, very small. And of course, for the most part, the Russians are targeting things that are not right in the heart of the downtown. For the most part, they're targeting things that they think have some relevance to Ukraine's military effort. But of course, they don't care what they hit and where the debris falls. And so there's always that effect of hitting civilians and killing civilians in the course of this. So it was a loud, long night. And the next day, Keith Kellogg arrived in Kyiv, and things quieted down for a couple of days.
They did, but then there were the drones that went into Poland, weren't there? The massive attacks on Kyiv. What do you think of the timing of that? Why now? What was their purpose?
Well, I do think it is a function of Putin being in a weak position and wanting to convey strength. So with Poland, they had this Zapad military exercise going on in Belarus. So the Russians and Belarusians were there. They had the usual air raids on Ukraine that night. And then from a separate location, they launched these drones going into Poland. Lasted about 6.5 to 7 hours. The Poles told me there was 21 total drones that entered Polish airspace. They were not able to shoot all of them down, but they did shoot some of them down. And what the most interesting thing about that whole episode is that all of the drones that entered Poland were unarmed, which to me is an indicator that it was intentional. Because if they were aiming at Ukraine, they would have been armed because they attack Ukraine. What they were doing here with unarmed drones was just testing to see what NATO and Poland would do.
And what NATO countries have done is launched Operation Eastern Sentry to defend NATO's eastern flank. Do you think that is enough?
No, I don't, to be honest. I think it's a good step. I'm certainly not complaining about enhanced readiness and enhanced multinationality in air defenses over NATO territory. But what we saw with both Poland and Romania is that Russia is willing to fly these dangerous objects into NATO airspace and putting NATO populations at risk. So we should be declaring an extended air defense zone around NATO territory with the cooperation of Ukraine to say we're not going to let them get that close. We're going to take things out, not waiting until they're inside NATO territory. If Russia is being that reckless as to send these dangerous flying objects that explode close to our borders, we should take them down before they enter our borders. So an extended air defense zone of 150 or 200 kilometers in collaboration with Ukraine, seamlessly integrating the air defense over that area, that would be important for the safety of NATO, and it would actually help Ukraine in protecting its own population in those areas as well.
So that extended air defense zone, that would be what in the west of Ukraine, would it?
I would say just draw a line out from the Polish borders, Romanian borders, Slovak borders, and say we can project air defense into that area to make sure nothing is entering NATO airspace. And I would tie it directly as a response to those reckless Russian use of drones inside NATO territory.
Of course, the Kremlin is going to argue if NATO fires a shot over Ukraine, it's directly involved in the war against Russia.
Yeah, isn't that ironic that Russia feels perfectly comfortable firing missiles and drones and everything you can think of at Ukraine every day, and even flying some of them into NATO territory. And yet, if NATO were to defend itself, that would be an act of war.
What about doing that without US military backing? Can it be done?
It can be done. It's better if we all act together, and certainly the U.S. has satellites and intelligence and targeting, and a lot of the enabling capabilities that would be needed. No, there's no suggestion that any of that would be turned off or shut down with respect to NATO defending itself either. And in fact, you heard President Trump in New York last week when asked if NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter NATO airspace. He said, yes, they should. So I don't see any suggestion that these enablers will be turned off. And I think it would be the forces at the fringes or the frontiers of NATO territory that would be the ones in the lead.
There has been some discussion about different NATO allies being able to have different rules of engagement, I presume, on Operation Eastern Sentry as it stands. But if you have this extended air defense zone that you're talking about, what do you think? How would it actually operate? How do you see it working on a daily basis?
My view would be, first off, we make it a public declaration. We say we do not want things flying in that airspace, period. And we say that, communicate that to Russia. And if you do, we will work to take them out, and we'll do so in coordination with Ukraine because it'll be over their territory, but NATO will be protecting itself. Then you'll have to have a 24/7 operations center where we are monitoring the skies. And when there are attempts to get into that airspace, we react immediately. And we should be able to do this with Ukraine doing what it does every day, which is defend itself and defend its territory, but with some assistance from NATO. And I would say that assistance would take the form of air defense systems that are inside NATO territory but projecting forward. It could be air launch platforms as well. And it would be an enhancement of the intelligence and integration of an air defense picture. And I think with a little bit of engineering work, NATO could help Ukraine, or Ukraine could help NATO use some AI to help instantaneously sort out the weapons mix that should be used to take out the drones, because you want to use the least expensive system possible to take out things that are coming in, so that you're not being overwhelmed economically just by the sheer number of low-cost drones.
And is this idea getting much traction?
Well, I've talked about it a lot. We published it in The Economist, Nico Lange and I, a German defense expert. I've talked about it, Polish foreign ministry and foreign minister and defense ministers. I've talked about it also with a few NATO allies. It's the typical breakdown in NATO. The North and the East are saying, yes, we need to do this. And the Western allies tend to be a bit more cautious. And so far, what Rutte has done is find that sweet spot in the middle ground and articulate it very forcefully, which he has done quite well. But I think that we are seeing Russia behave in deliberately aggressive ways toward NATO. And it's important that he see that NATO has the capability and the will to defend itself. If he sees weakness when he probes, he'll probe deeper the next time.
It's being reported this week that the US will provide intelligence to Ukraine to target enemy infrastructure inside Russia, and that other NATO allies should follow suit. Is this big news? It has actually been pointed out to me by one analyst that maybe this is already happening.
Yeah. So this is a great question, because it is already happening. Ukraine has been striking targets deep inside Russia for months now, and they've been having a significant impact on logistics in Russia, on oil refineries, gasoline supplies, trains that are delivering weapons to the front line. They've been doing quite well. And the only thing is that most of what Ukraine had done up until this point had been with Ukraine's own weapons. And here the US is now saying, and other allies have long said, there shouldn't be any restriction on Ukrainians of not using the weapons that we're providing to defend themselves by going after targets deep inside Russia. It is part of the, they're hitting military targets, not civilian targets, or at least militarily relevant for the logistics and supply chains, which are needed to send all of that fuel and ammunition and equipment and so forth to the front lines. So that is what may be changing, is a more relaxed attitude from the West about Ukraine using Western systems to do that.
But about the intelligence sharing specifically, that was already going on as well.
Yeah, and this is what I wanted to comment on. We shouldn't be talking about that. And it's frustrating. It was frustrating during the Biden administration when we would publicly announce everything that we won't do. And then we would do a weapons delivery package and we'd announce everything that was in it. And now we're here in the Trump administration and we're announcing that we're doing intelligence sharing for long-range targeting inside Russia. We don't need to be talking about this. And you are right that just as a practical matter, when you have intelligence and you have intelligence is data. It's a data picture. It's information about what's there. This is stuff that, yes, the Western countries have and share. It's also stuff that Ukraine itself already has. And you work together and you have a comprehensive picture of what's there. So it is not as dramatic as the news articles make it sound, and in fact has already been in existence. Ukraine knows pretty well what it's hitting.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com.